Are you going to know what to do if I tell you to write a story by following the 3-act structure, step by step? If you don't know what the 3-act structure is, go to Google and you'll Google the 3-act structure and you'll find a diagram that looks something like this. Does this diagram in any way tell you how to write a story step by step? Does it tell you the plot points? No. I'm going to be giving you the step-by-step instructions on how to follow the 3-act structure with a new definition that turns this diagram from this to look more like this instead, where it focuses on the changing of the character's intention in the story and how that happens in 3 stages from start, middle to end. The problem that writers face is that you have a really good idea for a story but struggle to turn it into a full story. Even if you're halfway through writing the story, knowing the plot points of the story and being able to follow those plot points step by step is going to be incredibly helpful for fleshing out your story and ultimately being able to finish writing your story. And the 3-act structure is the most commonly known story structure that people follow. But first, we must understand the common understanding of the 3-act structure and why it's not helpful. What you and most others understand about the 3-act structure is usually defined by Act 1, the setup, Act 2, the confrontation, and Act 3, the resolution. I think it's poorly designed, poorly defined, and those definitions aren't useful to writers following this structure to write their story. What does setup mean? How do you set up a story? It tells you nothing. What does confrontation mean? What do you do? What are the plot points? What's the resolution? How do you resolve a story? It doesn't tell you how to resolve a story. It just says, resolve it now. This is the time to resolve it. Well, how? If you have a story and you want to write it by following the 3-act structure, if you look at it with these definitions, you're going to have a very difficult time actually coming up with a story when following this structure. If you already have a story, you might be able to fit your story into the 3-act structure. You might be able to, label this part as the setup. You might be able to label this part of your story as the confrontation and the resolution. But if you think of it in this way, setup, confrontation, resolution, you're going to have a hard time actually creating a story by using the structure and following it. Because what's to follow? So I'm going to define it differently. And then we'll go over the step-by-step plot points that you can follow when writing your story. So first, the right definition, or the easier definition. The 3-act structure should be known as the 3 stages of the character's intention towards getting what they want or facing a problem in a story. In Act 1, the character has one intention, which I'll explain later or the next video. They have this one intention from the start of the story, which is the start of Act 1 to the end of Act 1. And then the changing from Act 1 to Act 2 happens when there is a change of their intention in the story, from one intention to a new intention. And the plot points that we go through is going to lead to this intention that changes what they do and what happens in the story. And then they'll have this intention from the start of Act 2 to the end of Act 2, and then the changing from Act 2 to Act 3, it happens when there's another change of their intention, from one intention to a new intention. And they will have that new intention from the story, in the story from the start of Act 3 to the end of Act 3, and then the story finishes, right? The intention is just ultimately what they're trying to do, what their goal is, and what the focus of the story is. It's important to remember that the 3-act structure is just like a stencil. You can use that stencil to write your story in a very specific way by following that structure. Great for simple stories, but simple doesn't mean non-advanced. Simple is sometimes better. We don't want to overcomplicate it. A short story can follow the 3-act structure as well because it's so simple. And so you can write a novel as well. But it's not the set in stone way to structure a story. A story can be structured in many ways. Dan Harmon's story circle, for example, which is just a chewed up and regurgitated version of the hero's journey that's been rebranded and made to look like he's come up with it. Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey. Dan Harmon's story circle, I will go over in a future video because it can be useful for certain types of stories. But Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, that is where the credit should go. And the hero's journey is another story structure which is most commonly seen in modern films, because the hero's journey story structure is fundamentally a character arc that tells a story of the transformation of a character from a normal, unenlightened person to a hero who has gone through massive transformation. And the hero's journey gives all the plot points you need. Set the known world, introduce the character, what life is like for them, introduce the mentor. Look out for that, by the way, an upcoming series of mine, how to write a mentor. Someone who can guide them, train them, enlighten them. Very important in the story. There are different types of mentors with different purposes, which I explain in the upcoming series. The Dark Night of the Soul. That's another series of mine. That is another plot point of the hero's journey. The Final Battle as well. That's another plot point. So many plot points that tell you exactly what to write in the story and when. It gives you the ideas. And that's why the hero's journey is so good. There's so many more. It's so easy to write. An easy copy-paste structure for modern films. It's simple, and again, simple doesn't mean not advanced. But that's also why modern films are almost all the same. Not a bad thing. Some are good, some are bad. But this is why we're redefining the 3-act structure. So you have the plot points rather than the useless definitions such as setup, confrontation, resolution, which is very unhelpful. Like, what does that mean? You know? So in the next 3 episodes, I will be explaining the step-by-step plot points and the writing process of the 3-act structure. I'll be going into depth about what those plot points are in Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And those plot points are the changing of the character's intention and how that happens, right? I'll talk about the story events that trigger those changes of those intentions through the character's realizations at the end of each act and more. But most importantly, it's the step-by-step writing process that you can follow in order to write your story by following the 3-act structure. So look out for the next video. I'm Joe Webb, a storyteller. Learn to write fiction properly.